This is Mental, the podcast that destigmatizes mental health. I'm Bobby Temps.
I'm Annie Harris.
Each Thursday we delve into a factor or condition that influences the mind and how to better manage it. With special guests and stats you can trust, here we go. During the course of our first year making Mental podcast, I've learnt so much more about a vast array of mental illnesses and the factors that affect our mental health in general. I've been inspired to interview guests about their first-hand experience and how they've learnt to improve or maintain their mental health. During this episode, I'll share some of the most insightful snippets from our first year and give you a flavour for any episodes you may have missed. For support with any of the topics covered, please check out the resources page on our website, mentalpodcast.co.uk. With all that said, let's get started. As the podcast to destigmatize mental health, the obvious place to start is the stigma episode with guest Lucy Nichol, one of the very best mental health journalists this country has to offer.
I think there's two extremes with stigma when you think about it. When you think about something like anxiety and depression, the biggest problems we face in terms of stigma are people being dismissive of it, whereas then there are other illnesses like, say, schizophrenia, where people assume that person must be scary or dangerous or weird. Both are forms of stigma. So it's really about understanding and talking more about it. But when I look back, some of the things that I was fed with through the media, through films like Fatal Attraction, and just the general talk and newspaper headlines, I certainly use stigma myself, if that's the right phrase. So I was certainly guilty of it, and I think it's interesting to acknowledge that and acknowledge that none of us are perfect.
Yes. Particularly once you've gone through mental illness yourself, it can be difficult to admit that by having some internalized stigma, you can be part of the problem. But I think it's really important to confront, because it's something that, a bit like other kinds of ignorance that people have to get over, there's a certain amount of name calling that goes on, but actually it's far more powerful to admit where you do have some ignorance and try and work on it than a lot of people seem to try and explain it away and be like, no, I'm accepting. I just don't want to live with them. I just don't want to be friends with them. But I'm accepting.
Because I see quite a lot on social media. Obviously, there's a huge mental health community, especially I spend a lot of time on Twitter, too much time, to be honest. If somebody says something like, oh my God, I'm so OCD, I've cleaned my house like Monica or something like that, I think you can see that actually that person is probably not trying to be malicious or cruel a lot of the time. It's a lack of understanding, and I think the best way to change and make an impact in that area is not by kind of attacking that person, but engaging them in a conversation. And I think, if you attack that person, it's really not going to help. The conversation will shut off very quickly. Whereas if you have a conversation with them to try to understand why they think that and talk to them about what, if it was OCD, or if they were saying, oh my God, I'm so depressed, I missed out on whatever piece of clothing in Topshop sale or something, if you can actually engage in a conversation and discuss why that depiction of mental illness, of depression or OCD is wrong. So I think we just need to learn, and we need to accept none of us are perfect. Let's not attack people. Let's just have a conversation about it. Then you're going to have a much more positive impact from that.
Through the nearly 40 episodes recorded so far, we got to battle mental illness misconceptions from the most common conditions to the most misunderstood. Up first, depression with one of the warmest people I've ever spoken to, fellow podcaster Terry Maguire.
And of course, when you're in it, depression tells you you don't have friends, that no one cares, that you've called on them one too many times, that, they have something better to do. So again, if those things are in place before you get to the place where you think no one gives a damn and that you're not worthy of their time or attention, you can say, I feel it coming. I describe it sometimes as like a train whistle, that you hear it off in the distance, like any other illness. Again, you start thinking, oh, I wonder if I'm getting that flu, that might be the time to say, hey, then they can know in advance and not wait until you're to the point where you're thinking, I couldn't possibly ask for help because I'm just a bother. And that burdensomeness is such a risk, such a red flag. I mean, when you get to that point, that's dangerous.
Yes, and I think it can't be underestimated the power of proving things to yourself physically, because when you're going through something mentally, you can end up so in your head as thoughts keep building on themselves and keep exaggerating, and they're getting darker and darker. And there's so much power in, if you're saying to yourself that nobody cares about you or you have no friends, well, get a friend there. Get a friend to come and sit with you in the room, because it's a lot harder to deny their existence when they're in front of you.
Yeah, that's the physical. I like that. That's very good. A physical thing to remind you that somebody cares when your mind is telling you they don't. I'll be borrowing that. So the idea that you can just sit with someone and say, I can hold this. I can sit with you in the dark. I can't make it different. I might not even understand, but I can let you know that you don't have to sit in the darkness alone. There are so many ways to be there for somebody, and they don't have to be, hey, come on, turn that frown upside down, or, throw some clothes on. I'm going to take you to a club and we're going to dance your sadness away. I mean, they have to meet you where you are. There is help. I mean, we need to say that. It does pass. I mean, you're in it, you think it doesn't, but you and I are both sitting here talking, and we're both dressed, and, we're both groomed and showered and fed and rested. And, those are things that you don't imagine being again when you're in it. And you just have to know from people who have been there the difference between, again, your mom saying, oh, you'll feel better tomorrow, and somebody who's been there. And the people who've been there, I think, have a responsibility. I know I feel it, to say, trust me. Trust me, trust me. Really, really, it does get better. It can get better. You will feel differently. And hang on.
For many of us, it can be incredibly difficult to get friends or family to understand what you're going through. But what if you're dealing with addiction and are actively hiding this from them? One of our first guests, Charles Edison, shared his personal experience overcoming this.
I found out that someone I went to school with knew someone that sold it. And living in such a small place, it was, I could phone them, and within 10 minutes, they're there literally wherever I am, they would come and meet me. So it was really easy to get it. And it went from being a Friday night to a Friday and sometimes a Wednesday night, and then it was every other night. And it just got worse and worse, to the point of I came close a couple of times to getting arrested. Not directly for drugs, but one time I was parked down the road in my car to pick up, and someone had seen me pass the money and take the drugs, but they'd phoned the police because they thought I was dealing drugs. And so I came really, really close to getting arrested. I stopped paying bills, so I was driving my car without tax, insurance, MOT, and most of the time under the influence. So really dangerous.
This was on the financial side to fund the drug taking? Then?
Yeah, so I had a credit card which I started leaning on. So I was using all my money to buy drugs, and then obviously using the credit card to live. And then that got to a point where I'd completely maxed that out, wasn't paying it, so I was getting like payday loans and borrowing money from people left, right and centre, and you end up just juggling like a million lies and telling lies to cover the lies. Really, really difficult. It distanced me massively, because I think eventually, whether they do it consciously or not, they stop wanting to know, because the less they kind of ask you, the less they're getting lied to. So I ended up feeling like they didn't care, because they weren't asking me or challenging me with like, well, where have you been, or where's your money? And I think they just stopped asking because they didn't want to, ask no questions, tell no lies, that kind of thing. But you're not in a great mental state anyway, but I was perceiving it as like, well, they obviously don't care, so I might as well keep doing it.
In an episode all about vulnerability as a factor in mental health recovery, fellow podcaster Seamus Kirst shared his similar experience.
With addiction in particular, it put up walls, because it's like this behavior that everyone can see, and on some level is like out of control as well, but you just like won't address it. And not only will you not address it, but when other people kind of like try to get near it, you lash out. So it does put up these walls, because kind of intrinsically all of your relationships are a little bit dishonest, because you're like dishonest with yourself. You're not being honest with literally anyone.
Absolutely. And particularly when it comes to dealing with addiction, as you say, it is naturally secretive, because it's about control. if people knew too much, they might realize you have a problem and then they may step in. And when you're at your worst, your priority is, how do I make sure the supply continues? How do I make sure that this isn't taken away from me? Because it sounds a lot like, with your experience, that was a coping mechanism.
Yeah, definitely. And I think from me, it's like I was putting out those signs of like not being honest. It's hard to go near it because you know that they're going to get mad at you. And it's really hard to know the best way to make them like listen to you without not talking to you anymore. Because like for me, when people would try to address it while I was in college, I would literally just like stop talking to them. Like there are people who I just didn't speak to for years because I was like, they said this one thing or like kind of like came too close to this area. And I didn't even necessarily like realize I was doing that, but now I like can fully see that.
Yeah.
I really relate to what you're saying as well, because my brother actually suffers with addiction and he hasn't spoken to me in about 6 weeks because I said, hey, what's going on? You know, you told me this is a problem and we tried to help you, but it doesn't look like you're taking any action. And then he kind of swore at me and called me a name, and he literally hasn't spoken to me since.
Yeah.
And it hurts so much, but I know that it's an illness, and I know that it's the illness and the drugs that's doing it to him, so I don't take it too personally. But I just relate when you were talking about things like men putting up walls, it just rang true on so many levels for me.
I understand that.
I have nothing to add. I'm just like, shit, this sucks.
I know, and it's so hard because like you're coming at it from such a place of like caring about him.
For other conditions like postnatal depression, it can be difficult for even our closest family members to understand our experience in what is stereotyped as an incredibly happy time. Following Amy Steele's recovery, she returned to her job at funkypigeon.com to create the UK's largest mental health themed card range. I felt incredibly privileged to hear her story told so openly in one of the most moving episodes so far.
Had my baby and it was just like my world came crashing down. So, you know, most people are like really over the moon, on cloud nine. I felt the complete opposite, but I didn't want to tell anybody that because I thought everybody would judge me and felt really ashamed. So I just kept it all in to please everybody else. And then 2 days later, I had a bit of a breakdown, got sent back into hospital and ended up being sectioned and sent to a mother and baby unit. So I was diagnosed with postnatal depression and it's been a bit of a journey ever since, but I feel like I'm getting there.
Mm-hmm. And could you talk us through what those first few days were like after having her? Okay,
so obviously when I first had her, I just felt immensely relieved that the physical side of it was over. And I thought, oh, that's it now. You know, I'm going to have all these feelings come rushing in like everybody talks about. And I didn't. And I just held her and I was like, who is this? What is this thing on me? But I thought, it's okay, I'm just tired. I've been awake for like 96 hours and I thought, oh, it's okay. But as that first day went on, because I had her at 5 o'clock in the morning, as the day went on, I just felt worse and worse. And it kind of felt like a claustrophobic feeling. Felt like I was suffocating and I didn't want to be around her. And she breastfed for about 4 hours straight that day. And I was tied to the bed. You know, I was sore, tired, as most new mothers are. But I just thought, oh great, this is my life now. My husband was desperate for us to go home, and I was like, oh, I don't really want to go home because I'm not going to see any of the midwives and they're not going to help me anymore. But I went home to please him. And that night, the first night at home was just awful. I thought this is what every new mother goes through. So I didn't think I was anything special. I just thought this is what every new mother goes through. So I felt like I was having a bit of an out-of-body experience.
In an episode that made me incredibly relieved how much treatment for mental illness has moved on, I spoke to writer Karen Manton, who shared her experience living with bipolar.
It was just horrendous. In 92, yes. It was the start of the year, and unfortunately it was the result of having had a termination the year before. It was at the time when I would have had a child, I would have had my baby, and I went on to have a phantom pregnancy. displaying all the symptoms of someone who was obviously very deluded. Mum called an ambulance. I willingly got in the ambulance, thinking that I was going to have this lovely baby. As I say, I wasn't functioning properly. My mind was obviously going. And when I arrived at the hospital, I was taken into a room and asked a lot of questions by a psychiatrist. At the time, I thought it was because there was some miracle unfolding. As I say, my mind was completely shot by now, totally deluded. And you see, at the end of it, I was taken onto the ward. And obviously, I was still under the belief that I was going to have this baby. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing, I was pinned onto a bed by 5 nurses who were shouting at me, "Don't be silly, this is not a pregnancy." And as a result of that, of the fear, I actually went on to have a grand mal seizure. It was the only one I'd ever had in my life. And I just completely had a fit, blanked out. And then I was kept sectioned for 7 days. And it was just horrendous. And when they decided they were going to release me from that 7-day section, it was at 8 o'clock at night. And they just let me walk off the ward and into a taxi and to go home, which was just, you can't believe it when I repeat it now.
To discuss one of the most misunderstood mental illnesses, schizophrenia, I was delighted to be joined by William Jang, who has devoted his life to writing dozens of books about mental health and the research knowledge surrounding it.
It's the most terrifying experience when you come through your first psychotic break. It's like, what's real, what's not real? Am I dead? Should I be dead? Did my life just end? What's going on? You know, it's horrible. My first break, I thought all my friends became gangsters. And then, you know, I checked myself into a hospital because I thought it'd be the only safe place for me. Luckily, I was lucky, I was blessed to be in a hospital setting. And then I thought I was in hell. I thought the hospital was hell, literally. It was in this world, obviously, it was a hospital. I was a safe place. People were taking care of me. Those were my symptoms. And
so does it come in waves where like all of that seems real and then you get moments of clarity?
Like, when did I get insight? And that's really the word that I like to use into my own condition is it was the medicine that helped me get the insight into my conditions. And so without the antipsychotic, I never would have come back to this world, you know, as a sane person. I never would have.
Do check back through our past episodes if you want to learn more about other conditions. This year we also explored a number of conditions outside of the mental health remit that can be linked to making mental illness worse. We discussed growing up with autism in one of our first and still most popular episodes with Clara Asmussen.
Officially, I was diagnosed only last year, which is quite late. I'm now 23, and a lot of people only receive their diagnosis a lot earlier in their life. But I actually realised that I had autism a lot earlier. Throughout my teenage years, I had a lot of struggles mentally and emotionally, and I never really was able to allocate them to anything. I never really thought about why or what. I just thought I was a bit of a weirdo and a bit of a freak, and I had some issues that I just thought were completely normal, part of being a teenage girl. There are moments where I only realise now that that is not normal. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So a lot of things that I did as a child, I realised, okay, that is not normal. How did no one pick up on that? Obviously, I'd fight with my parents. They thought I was just being a really teenager, and then they kind of pushed back, and I just grow increasingly frustrated with them and myself and not really understand why. And it was really difficult. But I clashed a lot with everyone, with my friends, with my parents, and especially with my brother. But looking back, I don't hold that against them because I was just a kid. I couldn't have known, and they couldn't have known. Like, my parents had to raise a child with autism, not knowing about it. So I don't blame anyone for all the clashing, but it's nice to know why all of that happened. And I think it's comforting to my parents to know, okay, we weren't awful parents. Our kid was just struggling a bit.
In an incredibly empowering episode, Sophie Savage shares how overcoming bulimia and living with terminal cancer taught her just how resilient she really is.
I work with what I call life shocks. Life shocks are those moments, are just unexpected moments in time, external events, curveballs that come at us. And I've learned that they are harbingers of reality. So when we attach our self-worth to something, then we get life shocks that expose that. If you're trying to prove you're clever, something's going to come along to show that you're not as clever as everybody else, but will you still value yourself anyway? I mean, when I got brain tumors, I mean, I'm fast forwarding right now. I'm living with incurable cancer, and I've had multiple brain tumors 3 times. And the brain tumors, when they come, they threaten my mental agility, my cognitive powers, my eyesight. At one point, I was struggling to form sentences coherently. I'm a writer, and I'm struggling to form coherent sentences. So the brain tumors have repeatedly threatened what I've most attached my self-worth to, my intelligence, even my sense of Sophie. It's threatened Sophie. I said to my husband once, when I'm not Sophie anymore, put me down. Just put me down. That was hard. But it also really showed me, what if I'm still worth something if I can't speak? What if I'm still worth something if I can't write a sentence? Am I still worth something if I can't walk, or I can't see, or I can't? It was very, very challenging for me to go. I mean, I had strong self-worth at that point, but it took me to another layer. Who am I, and am I still worthy if all this is stripped away from me?
This year, we jumped into a really wide range of factors in mental health, including toxic masculinity with Joe Sutherland.
Well, in many respects, I was lucky in that my dad is a very sensitive guy, but he's obviously conditioned as well by his father and other men around. So, for instance, just with small things like he had to unlearn some of his own limits in some ways. Like he was sort of happy for me to be the kid that performs on stage and stuff, but he would still, when I wanted long hair, he'd still secretly ask the barber to shave it off, and then I'd cry for a day and a half. And it's like just these things that needed to like be unpicked slightly. But why am I shocked if I see a man cry? It's because that's in the air. Why would I actually do that when in fact I was raised by a number of women who had to survive some pretty horrid things which were created by the fact that certain men in their lives were so repressed. They didn't know how to deal with what was inside their heads. They couldn't express it, acting out because of toxic masculinity, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. These men didn't have the tools to express their emotions. They weren't allowed to evolve them in the way that women are encouraged to.
Yes.
And then because we've got these phrases like, boys don't cry and man up, these things are reinforced. Oh, but you don't get to show the emotions anyway, so don't even bother trying. And that's really, what I think needs to end. That's the whole crux for this episode, is that why depending on people's gender, it defines whether or not they're allowed to emotionally mature in a healthy way. Why do one half have to bottle everything up? And it's not that they do necessarily bottle it up completely. I've been in relationships with girls where they have me as a support, and then they also have, various friends and family. And then I've been in relationships with guys where more frequently they save the emotions for me because I'm their partner, or, friends of mine will save the emotions for their girlfriend. That's where they think it's acceptable. They go from their mum being an emotional crutch to their partner being one. So if ever there was an argument for there needing to be an outlet for male emotion, that's it. The need is there. It's just being put into one person. Like you're only allowed to trust one person to let down the mask and show that you're actually not this version of masculinity that doesn't fucking exist anyway.
I think you're quite right.
That's what I think about that. The effects of growing up in the care system turned out to be one of the most moving episodes for me, particularly because I hope to one day adopt. Reverend Mark Edwards, MBE, shared his story and the inspiration for his book, Life in Care.
And the next day was my 19th birthday. And then after that, standing on that railway track and watching a train come towards me, and then asked me, why, but at the last minute I threw myself on the embankment. But I can still hear the train whistling. I can still see it coming towards me. And, I have flashbacks about that sometimes. And I just, sometimes when I watch some of these documentaries about One Under, and I think, yeah, I was almost one of them. But I try and stick to my rule of life, which helps me keep my mental health in check. And I have a loving family around me. I have a strong faith. But what I'm saying is, just because I have those things, don't mean to say that I still don't feel at times depressed, and I still don't hurt. And I still hurt over things that happened in the past, because I do. But because of my rule of life, because of my faith, I'm able to keep my mental health issues in check, doing the things I do, and by having the network of support around me. But when I was going through that, there was no one, no child line, there's no one I could turn to. Social services were interested. The Children's Home felt we've got something here. We've never had experience anything like this before. We've got a problem on our hands. We're going to have to just get rid of him, basically, and send him to someone else.
The LGBT community can often be more commonly affected by mental illness, with statistics usually being higher than the general population, and we were keen to unpack this in one of our very first episodes.
How this community can be at higher risk of experiencing a mental health problem, and unpacking the reasons for that, really. I mean, it's prevalent. The bullying,
I love
the
identity issues.
Identity issues, family, lack of support. It's a major part of the story for a lot of people coming out.
Yeah, so first off, I'm sure you have some stats for us.
I do indeed. The Stonewall, a wonderful organisation, have an awesome document full of statistics about this, and they have found that 1 in 7 gay and bisexual men are currently experiencing severe depression and anxiety. And in lesbian and bi women, that goes up to 4 in 5. So that's nearly 80% of women. And that goes up even more for Black, Asian, minority ethnic women. But 88% of them are experiencing depression and anxiety, which is a huge proportion.
And that's again right now? That's
right now.
Wow.
I was reading this article on psychology today, just a little light reading.
Okay.
On how trans people being deprived of a self contributes greatly to high rates of depression within trans men and women. And that actually manifests in very serious suicide rates, which I'm sure a lot of people are aware of. 40% of people who responded to the US transgender survey said they'd attempted suicide in their lifetime, which is deeply distressing, especially given the research they did into the number of transgender people who experienced abuse and harassment. They found 77% of those out or identified as transgender in primary school were verbally, physically, or sexually abused, which is shocking. But also at the same time not a surprise. The world is so cruel.
I'm unfortunately not surprised by that.
The world is so cruel to those they perceive as not belonging.
Another strong factor that often comes from stigma is shame. And so we devoted an episode to how shame can make it harder to be open about mental illness and access support when needed.
You were hiding it very well. It's like, yes, you've literally described exactly what I was doing. So, yeah, I don't know.
It's quite a universal mental health trait, though, isn't it? That ability to hide it. And I saw a campaign not long ago on Twitter where people were sharing, I can't remember what the hashtag was, but they were sharing pictures where they'd gone back on their camera roll to some of their worst times in terms of their mental health, and found all these pictures of them smiling, and they were putting up these just to highlight how easy it is to fake and how you build up seemingly a skill in that when you're dealing with mental illness.
Yeah, and I think I had kind of the best example of that in my dad, who on the face of things was very, I don't think anyone else really knew the extent of his issues, and he very much hid those and was very ashamed of them. It was all about pride and male pride, and I think I picked up on a lot of that as a kid, kind of subconsciously, and it just kind of fed into this sense that, you know, you're not allowed to feel this way. Almost like a picture of who you're supposed to be, and it's half based on who you were, because you're like, I just want to get back to that, and half based on some fantasy of who you need to be, or perhaps based on what you're picking up externally. And the whole time that you're focusing on that and just trying to be that every day, not only is it exhausting, number one, because you're constantly playing a part, but it also means that you're not actually focusing on the issue itself and doing anything to solve that.
In June, I launched a campaign to get mental health education on the curriculum for all UK schools. To learn more about this petition and add your signature, visit bit.ly/mentalpetition. That link will also be in the episode description. To help keep the over 180,000 people who have signed the petition so far updated, we produced a student mental health mini-series in the form of 2 special episodes. Here are some highlights from those with other guests who have talked about the importance of this campaign over the year.
That progressed onto relationships as well. So I was in quite abusive relationships, not physically, and at the time, because that wasn't really discussed at schools as well, but really emotional. I'd be put down quite a bit, again, by my friends and by my boyfriend at the time, but I wouldn't see it as bad. I'd think, oh, I've got a boyfriend, that's fine. And that just progressed a bit to, I went to university and I studied drama, so I got a degree, so I was ticking all of these boxes.
I just want to pause there on the subject of ticking boxes, because that seems to be something that comes up time and time again, is this conditioning we experience of you have a partner and that makes you happy, and therefore we can prioritise, ironically, the partner above our happiness, because but they make us happy, so they've got to stay.
Yes, that's so true, and there's such a pressure on that. And I think for myself in the past and for lots of people who I know now, they stay in relationships not because they're happy, but literally because it ticks a box, because it's almost when people say, oh, well, it's, I think by how people judge success isn't on happiness. It's, do they tick the box? Do they have a successful job? Do they live in a nice big house? What's their career? Yes. And that's actually quite easy, really, if you want to throw yourself into that. I think it's much more difficult to be true to yourself and be happy and, sort of discover real self-worth and do what your life is really meant for, so your purpose. I think that's really quite difficult. And I think that really is what I feel should have been for me anyway, taught in schools, about what makes you as an individual happy, what makes you as an individual, full stop, really. But because it was very much stress on math, science, English, we had to get I'm 30 now, just turned, and we had to get the 5 A to C's to go on to progress to A-levels. And it was all very much academic success. And so it is very much that word success was not ever associated with happiness. It's associated with academics, academia. It goes around to primary schools and secondary schools. And we do interactive workshops and performances. And so myself and the other actors, we're all certified mental health first aiders. So we can signpost, really. So if someone comes up and they're really struggling, we cannot, of course, we're not trained counsellors, but at least we have some form of knowledge and we know of the help that's out there, which I think is a lot of the time when children do say things to us, it's good to at least let them know they're not alone.
Yes.
And we do talks with parents as well, because what happened, it wasn't planned that we'd start doing talks with parents, but a lot of the times in the workshops or at the end of a performance, children would come and confide in us and they'd say, oh, yeah, but I can't say anything to my mum, or, oh, but my uncle says this, or, oh, but if we say this, it's weak, or... Yeah, so we started learning quite a few things and a few trends that were coming up. So we do also offer that at the end of the day, we do a presentation to parents. And that has actually proved really quite insightful, I'd say, because I think that's something, it's just, they may not have that at home. So let's create a good foundation from when they're young, just to look after each other. And that seems to be working really well. The teachers have been very happy with just seeing that. So you can see results just from a simple exercise like that seems to help.
Absolutely. And I think that's so important to highlight how, from any age, this is something the kids are experiencing. Maybe they don't all have experiences of mental illness, but they're all going through things. They're all going through a lot of changes in their lives as they get older. They're going through a lot of hormonal and body changes. And as much as the conversation should still be had at home about mental health. It's something that the schools are the thing that we can regulate. We can't regulate what happens in someone's own home. So the fact that you're in the school telling them that it's okay to feel like that right from an early age sets something in, because kids can be so impressionable. And no doubt you've had experiences where you meet the parents of the kids that don't feel they can talk to about things at home, and you're like, that makes sense that you're that
instantly,
parent.
Yeah.
But at the minute, it means that there's no like preventative treatment. It's almost like you have to reach a crisis point before you're considered unwell enough to even be put on the waiting list in some cases, which is just like the total opposite of how anything else would be treated. It's like there's just such a strong emphasis, like particularly at the minute, on a cardiovascular placement, and everything there is about trying to get preventative measures, so like stopping smoking, healthy diet, stuff like that. But then in mental health, a lot of that is just ignored, and they wait until you're at crisis point and then try to fix it going backwards instead.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think this comes back to the core of the episode of like student mental health, because for so many people it's not until they get to university and they're away from their usual like family support system, they're often away from home and where they grew up, and in most cases they don't have much insight into what mental health / mental illness is. And so is it really a surprise that then with all those life changes going on, they can reach a crisis point?
And also I think it was the pressure of having the uni lifestyle as well. So I was still trying to like go out every night and make myself have like this really good, perfect Instagram uni time, I suppose, that you're supposed to have.
I just wish someone would have just talked about it,
Yeah, it's funny looking back, isn't it, what is and isn't mentioned.
Yeah.
So I remember being told about mood swings, but not how to deal with them.
Yeah, right?
Like it was just, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
We won't tell you how to recognise them. We won't tell you how to deal with them. Your parents might just be annoyed with you a bit more.
Yeah, it's weird. It's so weird, actually, looking back. It's really weird. We got one lesson of sex education, and it was how to put a condom on. And that was it, really, to be honest. Really weird, looking back.
It's almost one of those things where you wonder, how did they teach such a lesson and leave so much out? How did they possibly explain it?
I think, again, it's like you say, like opening up a can of worms. Just people are just afraid of opening up a can of worms and having to deal with things they're not comfortable dealing with. I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, well, it's such a clear contrast, because I remember at certain points when sex education was progressing in legislation, then there'd be this backlash of, if you teach this, all the kids will be fucking at 12. And that's not the reality.
Absolutely not. And then it happens today, when I go into schools and talk to a head teacher about mental health, and they say, well, what happens if you create more mental health issues, or you spread, ideas about mental health, or...
Yeah. It's crazy, because there's surely no kid in that class that's like, ooh, depression, that sounds fun.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Like,
that's cool, I want a bit of
that. Yeah, it's weird. It's such a weird mentality.
I've got two daughters, 8 and 11, so one's just about to start secondary school, and I am very passionate about the fact that they need to be educated, not just because of the fact that their mum is going through this. Everyone has mental health, so I want to encourage them to have mental health awareness, so that they know when they're feeling good, or they learn so much about healthy eating at school nowadays, and both of my daughters, one refuses to eat healthily at all. We try our best.
I was that child.
Yes, and the other one makes the distinction of, I've had too many sweets, now I'm going to save those. I haven't had any fruit today, I'm going to have an extra piece of fruit. But they're both very aware of the decisions that they're making and the impact that has on their bodies and their health, as much as they can at their age. With regards to mental health, I don't think they had, until I started doing some activities with them, they had absolutely no concept. That's got to be age appropriate, obviously. But I think in the petition it mentions about Romeo and Juliet, and I remember doing that at school.
Mm-hmm.
2 people kill themselves and then you have to write an essay on it, and then you're just left to... Nobody actually really talks about the fact that they've ended their own lives because they weren't happy.
Yeah.
And I think
that's something I only thought about years later, because it just wasn't covered at all.
No,
so it never even occurred to me that it was suicide, because I was so young.
It wasn't until I read your the aspect of it in the petition that I considered it as suicide. It was just part of the play, even when I've watched the film, read the books, and I did it at college as well as school. And yeah, I just never really looked at it as suicide. 2 years ago, sadly, my best friend committed suicide, took her own life. And it wasn't until then that I'd even really thought about it. Even with mental health, I'd always just thought there's that bit that stops you or stops my friends, or I'd always spot the signs.
Yeah, well, it's one of those odd things where it's always something that happens to someone else.
Yeah,
until
absolutely.
It isn't.
Yeah, until it isn't. And so that's then, again, why I'm so passionate about it being involved in education, because both my daughters she was a family friend. So she was Auntie Kirsty, and she was brilliant. She was the funniest. She'd always had mental health issues. That's why we got on so well. But you know what I mean? We had that connection.
You had that in common.
And trying to explain to an 8 and 11-year-old who've lost grandparents and things, I'd always gone down the route of they were ill. And there was a reason and there was a purpose. And suddenly I had to sit them down and say, your 32-year-old friend who's the same age as Mummy isn't here anymore. Well, she wasn't ill. We saw her last week. What? And that conversation, and realised they have absolutely no understanding. And then they've gone on to draw from that if I've got a similar mental health issue, that must be what's going to happen to Mummy at some point. So they then have another load of worries on their shoulders.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because we've had some commentary of that on the petition, that some people are trying to decide whether it's, school responsibility or parent responsibility. My perspective is very much it's both.
Yeah, and I think that starts a lot of conversations off for parents.
One of the contributing factors we kept coming back to when talking about the mental health of young people is social media. So we were delighted to have Fiona Thomas on the podcast, who has written a whole book about this. And then they're trying to keep up with their virtual self.
Yeah, keep up with their virtual self and their virtual competitors. That's the worst thing about the internet, is it's just, you just go there and you instantly compare yourself to other people, even though I don't feel like that's something that I would ever do in real life. When I'm online, I'm just constantly, what's that person doing? Why am I not doing that? And I end up getting sidetracked about things that I'm not even interested in. Because I started off as a blogger, but I generally don't really blog very much anymore. And then I see a blogger being invited to this party. I'm like, why was I not invited to that party? I don't even want to go to that party, but I feel bad because I'm not going and someone else is going. So yeah, it lets you into these people put up things they want other people to see. It lets you into these places that you would never ever find out this information about people, but somehow you know all their day-to-day things, like why can they afford to have poached eggs in that nice place every day? That doesn't make sense. And then they're probably just reposting pictures from 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I think you need to have a healthy dose of skepticism with everyone's Instagram feed.
I'm pleased to say that many of the factors in mental health we covered were positive ones, including accessing support with Emma Carrington from charity Rethink Mental Illness.
That you can do around that to kind of try and make that appointment sort of easier for you and things. We talk to a lot of people about, planning that appointment, thinking about what's going on for you, what are those symptoms, writing them down. I'm a big fan of lists myself, having things written down, because I think that most of us, when we go to see the doctor, get quite nervous. If you've got anxiety or something on top of that, going to see the GP can be horrendous, So having things written down can really help. You can ask your GP for a double appointment. Not many people know that. So, you can say, actually, I'm going to need a little bit longer. So if you're feeling, it's harder for you to talk about things, you can ask for a double appointment. And taking people in with you as well. If you have got somebody that you can trust, that you can take along with you, that can really help.
Reducing Stigma with Emma Marks from the charity campaign Time to Change.
Then seeing how people actually kind of physically seem to sit up stronger by the end of the session, because I've talked about my own lived experience in a constructive way, that's given people permission, given, the opportunity for people to actually feel okay about talking about their own mental health or mental ill health, and actually not to be ashamed, and seeing others react to that is actually really powerful. It's made me appreciate the power of, talking about mental health from a personal point of view. And that's what Time to Change's kind of model is, when somebody with a lived experience of mental health problems talks to somebody who hasn't got mental health problems. And all the research shows that is much more powerful than doing a slideshow or handing out a leaflet, because you have that human connection and see that person as a person, and you can relate to that person, and also that kind of is really powerful in reducing the stigma.
Self-Esteem with one of the founders of the Self-Esteem team, who teach classes on mental health, body confidence, and of course self-esteem in schools across the UK.
But you forget that if you never show who you are, then you always feel like people won't like the real you. So you have to roll the dice. You have to leave yourself open, and you will get some negative stuff. Everyone isn't going to like you, right? But now I'm able to pin my confidence on things that have actually happened in relation to who I really am. Mm-hmm. So even if I am having a day where I feel a little bit down, there's stuff that I can look back on and go, no, but you have forged this connection with this person and they value you because of this. And those are all things that are a part of me, as opposed to, well, you've got all these people around you that think you're really funny, but I feel like I'm completely playing a character, so they only like the character. There's literally nothing to pull on to build your confidence if you're constantly putting that other person in front of you.
Because they can feel like compliments on a completely different person, not compliments to you.
Yeah, so you may protect yourself from the negative stuff. You also block yourself from the positive stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of positive I've found that can come from the negatives in terms of self-esteem as well. So I went to a sixth form where the demographic of people was very different to me. And so I ended up having to defend myself a lot, and particularly my values. And to me, that none of them were very radical. Like I remember speaking to someone that thought people that are homeless should just be shot, because he thought he just didn't see the value there in these people's lives. And to him, it was crazy. And to me, I just couldn't believe that. But then equally, his background was so different that he couldn't believe that I believe in social care. Yeah. And I was like, I thought everyone believed in that. Yeah. I thought in a first world country, we shouldn't have anyone falling through the cracks. And I know that does happen, but I don't think it should. Yeah. And so I'd have to find myself defending these things, which even in hindsight feels a bit surreal. But I'm very glad to have gone through that experience, because now it means if people challenge my opinions, generally they're far less polar opposite to me. And I know myself better.
For sure, because I guess it makes you question, like, where those ideas have come from for you, and also then where those ideas might have come from for the other person. So it makes you work on that level of empathy and compassion, I guess. And particularly if you're someone that believes in socialism, it's so easy to think that you're empathetic and compassionate to everyone. But then you meet someone that has a really opposing view to you, and I guess it makes you have to question that within yourself.
Yeah.
So you learn about yourself.
The Power of Speaking Up with TED Talk alum Lily Ash.
It really clarified in me how important of an experience this was in my life, and that it's something that I needed to be speaking about more. And I think to take a platform so public and to speak about something that's important to you on it, it really made me feel like, actually, wait, I need to be doing more of this. So I think obviously it helped, because in so many little ways, it encouraged me to start those conversations. Just even when I was writing the speech, like going to flat parties or whatever and having basic banter, and then someone asks, "Oh, what are you up to?" And you say, "I'm going to be giving a talk with TEDx." Of course, the first thing they ask is, "Oh, about what?" And so in so many little ways, I had to be like, "Oh, my mental health," and then normally a conversation would ensue after that. And so I think I was most struck by the fact that people were super chill with me mentioning this fact, and then if anything, they were actually really excited to have a space to reciprocate and to speak about it themselves. So I'm not sure if you've experienced that, but if you kind of say, "Oh, I run a mental health podcast," then it's almost like people suddenly have this permission to divulge all of their thoughts about mental health to you, whether it's their lived experience or the experience of their friends or family. And so I think that's when I really got this sense of the fact that, as we all know, we don't speak about it enough. And so, and the fact that when you do actually have more honesty around it, that it's not this horrific thing that people want to ostracize you for, but actually a point of connection, because it's quite a part of being human, I think, of having a brain and having mental health. So it made me want to do that more.
We were also delighted to welcome our first repeat guest on the podcast, Self-Love Liv, for an episode on medication and another on self-love. Here is a snippet from each of those.
They're not happy pills at all, because I still get depressed on them. Mm-hmm. I would love to have a pill that makes me sort of happy every day. I'd buy it in bulk,
Well, everyone would be on it.
Exactly. For me, it just keeps me at a level where I'm able to enjoy life, mm-hmm. and not depressed, and not being able to not get out of bed, not be able to wash myself. Keeps me at a level where I can live.
Another thing I'm interested to hear from you about is this idea of pill shaming, how there can be really negative connotations over taking medication, particularly more long term seems to receive more discrimination. Have you experienced that?
Oh yeah, from family members, from friends, from everywhere. I think people presume that if you take a tablet for mental health, it changes your whole personality. People wear glasses, people wear hearing aids, people use walking sticks, and it's just exactly the same.
That's such a good comparison.
It's the same thing, because it's something to help you live a normal life. Everything, I literally was so critical of everything I ever did, like my walk, the way I spoke. It became so silly to me that literally the littlest thing I did was not good enough. And I could literally have a conversation with someone and say one thing, and that'd be done. I'd be so critical of myself. I'd hate myself. I'd feel so terrible. And now I'm like, you know what? I am who I am. Be kind, and not only to other people, but to yourself as well, because you matter, and you may not think you do, but you really do. Never doubt yourself, and be your own best friend, because that's so important, to love yourself as you would a best friend.
Mm-hmm. I've got one from Lisa Nichols, and she says, "You need to be the example to the world on how to love you."
Yeah, I love that.
She's great.
That's a really good one, yeah.
We couldn't have an episode on self-love without also having one on self-care. So we're delighted to welcome Shanley Lewis for an episode. She works in London's mental health services and also runs a company that makes the self-care equivalent to Graze boxes.
When somebody came into the ward, most of the time we was able to use their self-care or their poor self-care as an indicator of their mental state. So most of the time, they might have not kind of had any washed or brushed their hair, those kind of things, and that was an indicator, a visual indicator for us to see that maybe they're not doing so well right now, because also usually when we're not doing our best or when we're not feeling our best, usually it's our self-care that's the first thing to go. You probably not be prioritising your sleep or not be sleeping as well, not be eating as well. So all these kind of different changes are probably first indicators for us to kind of be in tune and know, okay, maybe I'm going to have to kind of start, doing a bit more, because I'm quite, I strongly believe that, your self-care needs change as well, depending on your circumstances. So if you're kind of going through a really difficult time, that's where, you're going to need to kind of focus more on yourself, making sure that you're scheduling and putting different things in your day, in your week, that are going to be helpful to you. Mm-hmm. It could be really small things, even like if it's just making sure that you're drinking some water, because sometimes we can get so busy we forget our basic needs as well. It's just having kind of a drink of water, getting some fresh air.
The very last episode clip comes from good friend of the podcast, Fisky. He's a rapper who came in to talk to us about how music was an essential factor in him recovering from addiction and living through more grief in 10 years than many of us lived through in our whole lives.
That's a mad thing, isn't it? It's like talking to someone you don't know can be so much easier. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I run an event called Mind Over Matter where we discuss mental health through spoken word and hip-hop. And that came from when I got sober last year. I just woke up on a Monday morning after a 3-day bender on my own, and I was just like, I was unemployed at the time. I was like, what am I doing? And something clicked. I don't know what it was, but I was sitting there, I was like trying to think, like, what do you care about? And I was trying to get another job in media. I was like, what sort of media do I care about? And I'm actually having a conversation with myself in my room at this point. I was like, no, what do you care about? And all I could think about was mental health, spoken word and hip hop.
Yeah.
And I was like, what can I do with that? And I put a couple of events on before that went really well. I wanted to give people a platform that I never had. Mm-hmm. And it's mad to me that a complete stranger has to put an event on for you to feel comfortable. Like, where is that in your life? Do you know what I mean? Like, in any of our lives. When I released my album, a lot of people would say to me, oh, it's so depressing, it's so deep. But then I was like, what I didn't know was there was the only thing that was making me want to stay alive. Yeah. Like, the only thing.
So you can go back and binge your heart out, take a look at the full episode description for a list of all the episodes featured today. I hope you get as much out of listening back to them as I did. Turns out I actually quite like my interview style. Who knew? Also, if you haven't already, do consider listening to last week's bumper episode about suicide. Johnny Benjamin, who had a brief clip played earlier on in the mental health education section, was a delight to interview, and it ended up being the perfect last interview of the year, touching on a whole range of different topics. Thank you for listening. For a list of our recommended resources, visit mentalpodcast.co.uk, and remember, we are in no way a substitute for qualified counselling or other mental health support. Our show is edited and produced by the brilliant Pete Murta, with licensed music by Netsky. Links in the description. Speak to you next Thursday, and remember, you are enough.